Good morning, everybody. It's good to have everyone here. My name is Julian Nixon. I am the CAFL's Director for Diversity, and I look forward to moderating this conversation that we're going to have today. We've got a lot of amazing people on our panel, so I definitely want to introduce them. First and foremost, we have Moria Jackson, who is the Director of Diversity Education at Clemson University. We have Ileana Pinckney, 4-H Pinckney leader. We have Judge Garrett, South Carolina House of Representatives, District 3. Brantley Evans, 4-H Pinckney leader. Isabella Revels, 4-H Pinckney leader. Jamila Frazier, Center Administrator for the Charleston-Dorchester Mental Health Center. We have Nick Matthews, South Carolina State Teen Council and Florence County 4-H President. We have Sheriff Leon Lott of Richland County. We also have El Kersey of EK Med Broadcast Network. And I'm going to just kind of jump into this thing. This first question is totally open to anyone. If you want to just raise your hand or unmute yourself and take a gander at this question, feel free. First question: why do you think the death of George Floyd grabbed attention, unlike the deaths of other Black men and women to this point? I see two hands. I think Ileana just beat you, Sheriff Lott. I'll let Ileana go ladies first, and then I'll come back to you, Sheriff.
Thank you. I personally think that the death of George Floyd grabbed America's attention for several different reasons, partially because of the fact that it was on video. It's irrefutable evidence. Everyone in America saw it. You can't deny the facts. Also, the fact that justice was not served in a timely manner, and the fact that 2 other African Americans had lost their lives previously to the death of George Floyd in such a recent way that it really just took America by the hand, and it made people wake up and realize that this is not okay and that this needs to be stopped. And I think that it's very important that we as American citizens finally realize that, and that we're finally working towards making a change.
Sheriff?
The only thing I'd ask for had other police officers that stood by and did nothing. In the Walter Scott case, you actually had one police officer that was there. You didn't have other ones that participated with him. And George Floyd, you had those other officers who did absolutely nothing. They're just as guilty as the man who had his knee on his neck, because they failed their duty. And I think that contributed to everybody's feeling too, is not only did you have one bad cop, you had these other bad cops too, who stood by. Any one of them could have walked over and said, hey, stop that, knocked him off. They could have done a lot of things, but not to do anything, I think really contributed to the anger saw when they saw that video.
Ms. Jackson.
Actually,
go ahead.
I would add to that, it was a completely unambiguous act of injustice. And when you're on a man's neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, and he was not resisting, he was, down, I think it with not only America, but also the world.
Thank you. Representative Clary, you said you were.
Yeah, I think it was all the things that have been discussed and a cumulative effect of, you go back over the last few months, you go back over the last few, it's just kind of the straw that broke the camel's back, so to speak, that I think people just realized, much like what Sheriff Lott said, the most telling part is that the officers just stood by and did nothing. That was heartbreaking. But the fact that we've had episode after episode, and this one really galvanized the country. And I think it has to do with the times that we live in now. We're going through a pandemic. There's a lot of pent-up frustration, and this brought it to a head in this regard.
Isabella, you look like you had something you wanted to say.
Yes, just there's so much tension going on with so much police violence, literally with an election coming up and a lot of political turmoil. I do agree that it was just the advocate instead of better the final straw. And I am glad that people are speaking about this too, because it's just been going on and ramping up so much over the past years, and I think it hasn't gotten the right attention.
Julie, Professor Nixon, we've been talking about this a lot in a couple of groups that I'm a part of. But the culmination, as Judge Clary said, of the pandemic, not able to go with their regular life duties, taking kids to soccer practice. We're home, we're isolating, tensions are high. And I think for white America, it was a wake-up call and an in-your-face thing when tensions are high and everybody's anxious and everyone's feeling emotion. George Floyd affected us as hard as Walter Scott, Walter Scott's mom just died this year. We are still struggling in Charleston. White America stopped in their tracks and not able to go along their everyday life, having to see this. It had a huge impact because they were stuck. Does that make any sense?
Yeah. And I'm going to take this next, I see Elle, she just raised her hand. I forgot to mention that if you use the raised hand feature there on the screen, it'll help me keep track of where the hands are. Right now we're playing Hollywood Squares. And so everyone's in a different order trying to see where you are. And that'll make sure that anybody. So yeah, you can click that and it'll pop up on my screen. Elle, you had something you wanted to say.
I concur with everyone's statement so far. I just wanted to kind of add a historic component. If you go back and you look at what made the Vietnam War become a conversation in the United States, what made civil rights become a conversation in the United States, and it was seeing it in its raw form on television, and you couldn't be misled to what actually occurred, right? So with the culmination of all the different murders that have happened in a very short period of time by police in this, what a lot of inner city youth have come to know as has been seen by people who never have had the possibility of seeing this as a real thing. So you can go back to the 80s when they were like, this is what the type of thing that they were experiencing. It's not that people in general are against the police, because when something goes wrong, you call the police, right? So that's not the issue. The issue is that when anything of a minute instance happens, given who responds, where they respond, the outcome can be so extreme that a person is dead, because in the heat of the moment, the person dying wasn't kind of necessarily the thought, but in hindsight, you see, oh my God, I killed somebody, so now I got to cover it up, right? So we've seen that happen so many times, and it's been like the fabric of Black youth America that these kind of things happen. And you have, just like now, you have Black young men and women, and it's not being talked about in like mainstream. So now the thing is there are like atrocities that happen consistently. And just because we were able to be front and center for an extended period of time because of coronavirus, people can't work. People are already frustrated because their immediate environment is being affected. So now they're like, okay, if you're going to do this to these people and then for this period of time, now we have to do something, because if it's going to be them now, then it's going to be me next. So that's, I think, what really kind of has been the spark. So George Floyd was that straw that broke the camel's back, or the igniter to a keg that had been being stockpiled for centuries.
I have a follow-up question to that, and I want to actually target this question to some key individuals. And for our student leaders, I want Brantley, if you could think of an answer to this question, and Nick, if you could think of an answer to this question as well. And then for our professionals, Sheriff Lott, if you could answer this, and Representative Clary, if you could answer this. And I'll start with Sheriff Lott and Representative Clary, and then we'll go to Nick and Brantley with the same question. Everyone on this panel, you represent a specific represent a specific group of individuals in our community. The question is, how did your community, what are the thoughts on compared to before its death now in your communities? I think for Sheriff Lott, if you kind of talk about law enforcement, because we don't typically ask law enforcement how they feel in these moments. Representative Clary, how the statesmen and stateswomen have felt, and then Brantley and Nick, what group of your community that you want to speak on behalf. How do they feel now, post George Floyd's death compared to pre?
I'll start off. We were disgusted, and when I say we, that's good law enforcement. When we watched it, like everybody else, we were very disgusted because we knew that was going to reflect negatively on all the good cops and the great things they do every single day. So within the Sheriff's Department, we've had conversations amongst ourselves with all the deputies. We don't have anybody do something like that. What can we do working with the community to help the community plus us and continue to reach out to them? And I said this, we can't build a relationship with someone when a critical incident is going on. You have to develop that relationship and build that foundation a long time before that. And that's what we've done in Richland County. And so I hear from citizens of Richland County is, they shake their head and say, I just don't think that would happen here. I just don't think we would have cops like that, because we help monitor the Sheriff's Department. We know that the Sheriff's philosophy is to treat everybody fairly and equally. But what we hear from is young people who want to have their voice heard, that may not before George Floyd said anything. They may have talked amongst themselves, but now the younger generation is saying, we have a voice, we need to be heard. Listen to us, listen to our concerns, listen to our fears, and what can we do to stop these fears and these concerns? So the biggest thing I see is young voice heard, and we're listening to it, and we have to listen to it. I just wish all law enforcement agencies across the country would do the same thing and pay attention to the community, build a foundation with their community, and listen to their community.
Thank you. Representative Clary?
Yeah, it's really interesting when all this transpired. I started texting with many of my African American colleagues in the General Assembly as well as members of my race. And, I think it's really difficult for us to try to empathize, visualize, in any way, say, how does it feel to be an African American when you're stopped by a policeman, when these things happen? And as I told a number of my colleagues in the House, texting and then later talk on the floor yesterday, I want to help, but I don't want to get in the way of the message that you're trying to promote. I want to be part of it, but it's not up to me to really lead it. I want to join and collaborate in this. But I will say this, we have such a groundswell of support for the things that we're trying to do in this regard now. We're limited in what we're doing insofar where we are in our session. We're in an extended session that's limited as to what we can do. But there's a lot that's going on in the background that is laying the groundwork for things to change. I truly had to say, because I'm a lawyer, and one lawyer gives all of us a bad reputation. And it's the same way in policing or whatever it is. But these professions are, when something like this happens, it is magnified. And I think that what we've got to do is to improve. And Sheriff Lott runs such a great agency, and we have a lot of great ones around here. But we also see episodes when we have a breakdown in that process. And of course, we're human beings, and there are going to be instances where things go wrong, but we want to minimize those, and if possible, but minimize them to the extent that we can. But this idea that when a policeman pulls up behind me, all I'm thinking about is, was I speak, where's my registration, where's my insurance? Nothing else enters my mind. But I realize that is totally different for African Americans. And, when I think about that, I've got so many friends that when I came in here as a freshman in 2015, and little did I know that 6 months later, we would be dealing with the Emmanuel shootings, the removal of the Confederate flag. And that's what, in looking at the last 6 years, in essence, that's what I have been focused on with my colleagues, because this is an ongoing issue. And I know we have other questions to get to that I could talk about now, but I'll leave it at that. I'm sorry.
Thank you. Brentley?
Good morning. First thing I want to say is that living as a young African American male is very different from living as a young Caucasian man or woman. Just because rules are different for all of us. So trying to find the best way to say this. I personally can't do the same thing as some white people. I can't do the same thing as some white people can do, because they're really different, just because of the color of my skin. And personally, it's devastating, because I personally have a lot of friends. I have a lot of white friends, a lot of black friends, but sometimes I gotta remember my limits. And I just had a deep conversation with some of my other friends, and no one really realizes it because no one really acknowledges it. And I think now, because of what happened with George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, all these shootings, um, this, all these horrible things are happening just because of racism. The racism still exists. As much as we don't want to acknowledge it, it still exists. And it sucks because it's 2020. Slavery, it's been over for years now. People harming each other because deep down you still have a hate for someone whose color their skin is just different from themselves. And this is a really sensitive topic, and I'm happy we're
I think we lost them there just for a minute. I think it was just a little shaky. But we'll keep going because I know he'll be right back. Nick, can you pick up there?
I can. The difference between it being is that I've noticed from where I live, in Florence and in Lake City, the climate isn't as severe as it is in the places where we've seen recently on the news, but it still is there still is the presence of racism in the community. However, because of my ethnicity, I haven't had to deal with it as much as I know some of the African American friends that I have that are in the city. But after the events of George Floyd, it's been really great to see how many people step up to try to make a difference. In Lake City, just last week, a group of high schools created their own rally, protest. And it was a very, very peaceful protest. They walked down the streets and they had a protest organized completely by the students, ran by the students. And there was police there, friends of police, or friends that the students had in law enforcement. Everybody was there to support. And it was just really great to see that they understood what was happening and how to organize a right protest, not a violent protest or anything that would be unethical.
And to Nick's point, Julian, that points out the importance of having representation at leadership levels, because the city manager of Lake City is an African American woman and grad, and one of Sheriff Lott's former employees. You raised a good one, Sheriff Lott.
Thank you. She is good. I'm trying to get her to come back one day.
I love how that interconnected just now, and I just want to, yes, go Tigers. I just want to throw that in there. For all the youth who are white now, I want to point out something very significant that just took place. So Nick Matthews, who is a young adult leader, was pointing out and explaining to us what efficient, nonviolent protest looks like. So we just heard that's a lot of questions have come about that. What does that look like? What does a good one look like? And Nick just nailed that. And then Ms. Frazier came in with saying, hey, and it also takes supportive leadership. So there's part number 2. Not only was that supportive leadership known by Ms. Frazier, but it was also validated by Sheriff Lott. So we saw supportive leadership that has validation by supportive, trusted leadership in our community. And I think that's something that we should take down and remember when we're creating those movements. So let me not lose this momentum, because I want to tap into some of that energy. I want to come to Miss Moria Jackson, who is the director of diversity education for Clemson University. And Moria, I want to kind of turn the bus here a little bit. We've said the word about 9 times already. Let's talk. What is racism? We use the word all the time. Sometimes we use it effectively. Sometimes we don't use it effectively. What is racism?
Right. So racism is definitely a topic that is sometimes hard to articulate in words. It's definitely you wanted to bring attention to this because there's a young lady, a recent college graduate, if you all have not heard, she actually reached out to Merriam-Webster dictionary to ask them to change their definition of race, to share with you all that racism is dynamic and ever changing, and it's really based on concepts of superiority. And talking about racism, it's not just about those individual moments or outcomes. It's really about a system. And the critical aspect of racism that we have to address is the accumulation and incorporation of long-standing racialized practices that are in all of our social and economic structures. And to touch on that previous question, when you asked about, how did you, pre-George Floyd, post-George Floyd, it's really important to point out, police have always been around. But when you're talking about the context of the South, and I'll specifically talk about South Carolina, the economics in South Carolina drove the creation of police forces to be centered around the preservation of slavery. And so some of the primary policing institutions were slave patrols, and their job was to chase there to prevent slave revolts. And so when you talk about a African American's experience with police officers versus non-African American, it's so that history into account. And it's so important to understand that these racialized experiences that are experienced by the Black community, the African American community, it was enforced by our government. It was enforced. That's why you have these just visceral reactions, because again, policing is not new. It's not as modern invention. And so you think about that history, and we haven't addressed that yet. So I just think it's really important that we point that out as well.
And I want to kind of off of that, Moria. Where everybody wants to learn, everybody wants to understand more about history and how we've gotten here. So where are some really good places leaders can go to build that understanding, and then adults as well? Where can we go to begin to change our minds and grow in knowledge about our past so we can move into our future?
Well, one of the sources that I will recommend, it's an older documentary that was done by PBS and some other organizations. And if you Google Race, The Power of an Illusion, it's a great 3-part docuseries, and it also a companion website, a lot of primary resources. I would encourage people, to start there. Right now we have the National African American Museum of History that has a trove of resources online. And in 2020, just the amount of online resources are amazing. I personally love the library. I think it's critical that individuals also look at primary sources. You don't always have to go through a book at somebody else's interpretation. How do you get to those primary documents? Go look at newspapers, go look at legislation, go look and see, so you can interpret that for yourself as well. And of course, schools, it's really critical that we ensure that the curriculum teaches all history. It focuses on everybody's voices who, you don't learn about certain things in school. And so it's really important that we hold our state accountable in 2020. There have been great recommendations about incorporating African American history into the curriculum, and we need to make sure we do that.
And I second that PBS reference. The special was Henry really, really good. And I have been using the African American museums on to friends. Like, I've seen friends literally say, "Is Aunt Jemima really offensive? I mean, seriously, I want to know." And then I'm posting, all right, since you're not clear, I'm posting the direct link to the African American Museum. So utilize that. And there's another one coming to Charleston, the International African American Museum, that also has resources posted.
I saw your hand up. Go right ahead.
Just wanted to add real quick. I think it's really incredible that June, being Pride Month, that there's a lot of new media about these incredible LGBT African American figures, and because I think it's really important that those two persecuted communities be able to come together and fight for not only equality but also recognition. So I think that's really amazing that that's finally happening. I just hate that it took so long and so much violence to make it happen.
Representative Clary?
Yeah, in listening to all of this, I go back to 2015, and I really thought we had made strides in race relations when we started debating the removal of the Confederate flag from State House grounds. But during that debate, I quickly recognized that there was so much latent racism. And since that time, after the 2016 election to now, there is so much overt racism that just permeates our society. And it starts at the top and comes down. People will write, say almost anything now that to me is just so offensive. I have a hard time wrapping my head around the fact that they've been going through this right now. But I think it goes back to George Floyd. That has been such a galvanizing occurrence that just brought all of this to the surface, and it's such a healthy discussion for us to have. It's a painful discussion, but it is certainly healthy, and one that we have to try to work through this 400 plus years that we're dealing with, because that's exactly what it is. And had more interviews, requests for interviews, talking about the Heritage Act and all of these things that we're dealing with right now, because it is on everyone's mind, and it should be on everyone's mind, because we have to come to grips with these issues.
And I would like to, I want to back up just a second for Issa's comment. I got to give a shout out to leaders in the LGBTQ community, because they've reached out and they've said, "Hey, we got your back. We're not even going to have our event right now. We're going to put our energy and time and heart every month so that your voices are not silenced." And the last letter I got like that, I'm not gonna lie, I'm a big boy, but that was great seeing that type of support. So as we're having communities come together and lock arms for this, I have a question that I kind of want to throw to Sheriff Lott and to Ms. Kersey. Now, youth are mobilizing, they're gathering, they're learning more. We're going to get more education from everyone from the panel today. How, for Sheriff Lott, how do the youth leaders of South Carolina communicate with law enforcement about what what they want. And then Kiersey, I know you personally, so I'm just gonna say L. What's the technology for youth to use to help them communicate and mobilize? So I'll start off with Sheriff Lawton, then L, I'll come back to you.
Reach out to us, Instagram, Twitter, personal calls, all these things, we welcome those. And I think that's where we're making a difference now, is that we are listening to young people. And I want to go back to a peaceful march. 2 weekends ago, we had a replica of the Million Man March here in Columbia. A group of young men put that together with assistance of us, law enforcement, worked with me for over a week to help them get it organized, make sure it was safe. I walked, it was great, and there was no violence. F the police. It was, there's problems or issues, let's work together. You saw the community come together at that point. White, black, brown, male, female, you name it. Everybody came together, and it was great. And that's what a protest is about, is getting your message out up or causing violence. And we welcome that. Law enforcement, we welcome that. I heard from a lot of young people during the week building up to that, and I've heard a lot of young people after that. Us and people in my position, we need to understand, we need to listen. We need to listen. But I encourage young people to have your voice heard, have it heard in the right way. And that's not by throwing a rock or burning a building down. Have that conversation with us. We want to hear your concern. We want to work with us. And I think most, hopefully most chiefs and sheriffs and agency heads would welcome that. I know we do in Richland County.
Elle, what you got for us?
I think that was a really great comment by Sheriff Lott. I think that, communication, most critical point of existence, right? So no matter what level of, communication that is, all the way down to your cells, they have to be able to talk to each other. So what I would suggest for youth is that whatever vehicle that you use for communication, whether it's social media, letters, protests, or whatever, they have to be done in a respectful manner. Because your message will be misconstrued and aberrated, regardless of how you present it, because that's just the nature of Whisper Down the Lane, right? We all remember that game as a kid. But if you have the respect of the people who you're trying to speak to, you're going to take the time to add your voice and not hear the noise. So yes, there's a lot of emotion now, a lot of, but emotions change, right? So you can't let your emotions dictate how you perceive. So it's fine to be angry, it's fine to be frustrated, it's fine to be whatever emotion you feel, but it's to let that spill over into disrespect for yourself. You want to allow your temporary condition to cause, so, and the problem could be you dying. So, and I know that that's kind of a lighthearted maybe thought, but the more that we can be that type of effective more often than not, it's better, right? So see, you have, there is a time to express your anger for sure. And I don't want to negate that, because that is, there is a time for that. But when it comes time to actually getting something done, the more effective your communication, the more you're going to help your cause in the end. That's all I got to say about that.
And Julian, I want us to make sure we're careful. I know we're trying to provide guidance to young people who are in this room about the path to move forward, but I want to make sure that we're really, really careful too about, we're not interested, I'm an advocate for peaceful protests, but I think we need to put it in context. People are traumatized and it is pouring out. So we have to be very careful now as protests that do get violent. If a kid is molested and starts fighting at school, we can't suspend him from school. He got molested. He shouldn't be fighting. Fighting's bad. But there's a reason. There's stuff churning in him that he is not okay, and it's exploding. So that is the stuff that we got to kind of deal with and just be very careful, because then it starts to feel like almost victim blaming. Does that make sense?
It does. It does.
And in Charleston, they have had some peaceful protests. They have had violent protests. They've had people arrested. My husband has been volunteering getting people out of jail. And it just reinforces the trauma that they're going through, because the protests, thank God, it's not just Black people. There are allies in it, and it's mostly not Black people. But when my husband went to bond court and 6 people got arrested, every one of them was Black.
Let's see. I want to come back to that. Let me get these hands. I got Issa and then I got Ileana. So let me go to both of them here for a moment.
Can I just jump in a second? I totally get that. I really do. And I so am with you. I'm just trying to, my point was just that we have, like, once we get through that anger part, like, yes, that's what I was trying to say. Yes, be angry. Yes, do what you have to express yourself. But once you get past that emotional part, then the time comes for effective communication. And that's just kind of what I was talking about.
Yeah. And that's, believe it or not, both of you are reading my mind. There's the question I'm about to ask in just a few minutes that actually gets into that. So I'm glad you're already ahead of me. This makes the job so much easier. Let me get these two hands, and then I want to go to Moya for actually having that conversation. Isa, you had your hand up for a while, and then I'm gonna get to Ileana. So Isa,
I just wanted to say real quick that while I do think that the more violent protests that's what's gotten attention so far. And so while I don't necessarily support it, because also press has been, like, I'm just gonna, for an example, Fox News has been posting just blatant lies and photoshopped pictures of protesters, trying to make these protests seem more violent than they actually are. So while the more violent protests have been getting more attention, which is good, there is a time and a place. I think right now there are better ways to support this movement, like boycotting companies that are supporting anti-Black Lives Matter movements and that sort of thing. So while there are pros and cons for both, I think at the moment we need to be careful about the message and how we go about protesting.
that's a good point. Ileana?
I completely agree with everything that's been said. I just wanted to kind of bring up the counter argument in the sense that, like, I've always been a very peaceful person when it comes to protests, and my family has been the exact same way. And I know that several people have been like that over the years, but things don't change. Like, we haven't seen a change. African-American people are still constantly losing their lives. And where I may not feel the need to go out and be violent or voice my opinion in a more aggressive manner, I do know that several people who are looking back at history and they're like, we've tried not listening, and look at what the media is doing now. They are over publicizing the violent protests instead of the peaceful protests, but it is getting people's attention, and it is making people say, hey, this needs to change. And more people are jumping on that bandwagon. And this is by no means me supporting violent protests or me saying that that's something that I want to do, but I am saying that I do understand where they're from. And I think that if there was more of a reaction to peaceful protests, like, I feel like everyone in this chat would react positively to a peaceful protest. And we all see that yes, change needs to be happening. Yes, it can happen in a peaceful way because we are all on a similar understanding. But I do think that people across America, there are people who are in higher positions of power to make change, who have seen the peaceful protests happen and they don't do anything to change it. And they've had effective communication from young adults and adult leaders from across their communities, and things have not changed. So I think that's where the violent protests are stemming from.
So I've got a question, because I can tell we tapped into a vein here. So let's stay here, because I have a feeling that everybody has an opinion on this, and I think that a lot of our viewers do too. So how far? Maybe I shouldn't say that. That's kind of setting you up. Let's back up a little bit. So with what's happened since George Floyd, we asked the question earlier. About how have your communities responded, and how do they feel pre-George Floyd, and post-George Floyd. Now we want to switch the question up a little bit to tap into what people have been asking. And that question is, how do we talk to others about moving forward when we've seen happen in the past? Several of you mentioned historical accounts. Clary mentioned when he came into his position and in 2015, and I remember that very well. I have a lot of family in Sumter and Columbia, and we spent a lot of time talking about that and talking about how to move forward. So how do we forward, and how do we tell young adults and teenagers, how do they move forward past this in regards to the past? The past is just now, just a second ago. So with everything that's happening with Ahmaud in Georgia, with George in Minneapolis, with Breonna Taylor, and the list goes on and on. We're coming up in another month or two. We'll be talking about Trayvon Martin. How do we move forward with the history that we have behind this conversation? I've got Lee, and then I've got Sheriff Lott. Brantley, I'm sorry.
Okay, you're good. Before we move on, I feel like it needs to start in the classroom, because we talk about African American history and the civil rights movement. That's a really sensitive topic, and I feel like teachers in school don't really get even to the
Brantley.
Pretty much deep in the unit, because they don't want to offend anybody, make anybody uncomfortable. But before we educate more people and be aware of what's going on. So a lot of
Brantley, you're cutting out. Oh, we just lost Brantley. Got a little technology. Hey, Brantley, we're gonna come back to you here in a moment. We'll get you so we can hear you. Sheriff, I know you gotta go in a few minutes. Can you go ahead and weigh in on that question, and we'll try to come back around. I want to hear from some other youth on this one too.
Well, we need to have action and not just talk. And that's what we've seen in the past. And I think that's what's frustrating people. After Walter Scott, we passed the bill that said that all police officers had to wear body cams, but the funding wasn't there. So it was a feel-good law, but it didn't have the teeth. And I think young people now and older people are tired of, passing laws that just want to make you feel good, but anything. And I think what we're seeing today after George Floyd is that the community has said, let's talk about it. Let's make some changes. Let's make some progress. Let's move forward. Let's take some solid action. Quit talking about it. We're doing that for years now. We're back, Senator Pinckney's been killed. Walter Scott's been killed. We've been doing a lot of talking. What have we done to fix the problem besides talk about it? Young people, I think in particular now, are saying, okay, y'all been in charge. You've talked about it. You haven't done it. That's what I see is different than what I've seen in the past, is that we're talking about it. Let's do something. Let's get a plan. Let's get some things that can need to be accomplished, and then let's get them done. Some of them is going to cost money. Okay, let's put the money in it to make it happen. And the body camera is one thing. Every law enforcement officer in our state is supposed to have a body camera on when the state provides it. The state hasn't provided it. So you have, if an agency doesn't fund it themselves, they have officers that don't have it. Change that. Let's change that. So I'm sorry I do have to get off. I think going back to something with young people, how the voice can be heard, we're doing that right now. Absent of, George Floyd being killed, I doubt if I'd been on this Zoom call with you. So you have people now who are listening to young people because we need action and we have to do something. So I think this is great progress. Let's continue. A month from now, let's don't say, oh, it's done and over. We got to keep this going. And young people, I think, have got to be the key in driving us older adults to making something happen positive. So again, to be on here, it's great. If there's any issues or questions, I welcome anybody to contact me and call me. And I have to do this. I've seen a lot of orange. Go Gamecocks.
Thank you, Sheriff.
Julian,
I've adapted a tough skin with that. I come from a Gamecock family, so I Hey, Jamila, what are you going to say?
Sure. I was going to say, this is a thing that I'm learning as a middle-aged woman. I made some progress and probably won over some allies in my 20s and my 30s, but learning to tell our stories. So what we do is we experience this secondary trauma because stuff is happening in the world and we keep it to ourselves, or we get in our little church group and we talk about it, but we don't talk about it like us. So I'll give you a perfect example. I believe it might have been Jordan Davis, the little kid, the 16-year-old kid, went to a party with his brothers, got shot by the police there. Leaving the party, the police shot him with a rifle. 16 years old. I heard this in the morning on the way to work. I am bawling, crying, pulling into the parking lot, calling my husband saying, I think I'm gonna take a sick day. And my husband is sweet as, my husband, he's sweet as pie, whatever you wanna do, boo. He told me, no ma'am, get your beep in that office. Every time someone looks at you and says, Jamila, you're not your normal cheery self, you say, this 16-year-old boy was killed by police for no reason, and all I see is my 6-year-old son with bullet holes in him. I can't think straight. I can't eat. That bothers me. And it's constant and persistent. And I had to learn to start telling my story every time people are uncomfortable. I had to learn to proactively tell my story. Charleston County Clemson Club reached out to me about something random. Are you still going to be our rep? And I said, for now I am, but we're slammed with what's going on. So we are talking to students, murders of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, and the trauma they're experiencing because of it. They didn't ask me all, but I'm gonna tell it to you, and I'm gonna proactively tell it to you so you can get used to it, because we can't have these uncomfortable conversations. At some point, they gotta be comfortable so that we can get to action. If they don't realize it's a constant in my life, then no one's gonna be motivated to action. So I would just would offer, I'm learning, and I'm not an expert at it. This is me in the process of learning.
Liana and Issa, I saw your hands up. What you got?
If I could just second on that statement, the other, like a few weeks ago, I released a video in memorabilia of my dad. And I didn't realize, I never saw any value or importance of telling my story or talking about how racism has directly impacted me in my life. And I always wanted to brush it off and just pretend that it didn't exist. Going to school and having people look at me different or having people treat me different because of something that's happened to me. And it took me the last 5 years of my life until now to realize the fact that, no, I can't pretend that this isn't a part of me. I can't pretend that these stories or the things that are happening in the media don't impact me, because I was talking to some of my friends who aren't African American the other day, and they said that me telling my story and explaining how racism has directly impacted me helped them realize that racism really truly does still exist. Because when you see things happen in other states or halfway across the country or in different places that you don't live in, then it seems less real. Like, you see something on the media and it doesn't seem real, so you're like, oh, racism is a thing, but it doesn't impact me. It doesn't impact the people surrounding me, so it doesn't matter. But I had to realize that me saying something helped the people around me realize that it mattered. And even if your situation isn't as extreme as mine is, even if you have, like, if you're an African American person and you've been called the N-word, talk about that. Let other people know how that impacts you, because it's not just something you read about in books. It's not just something that you see about on the TV. Like, it's real and it impacts you. And I think when people realize that it impacts you or somebody that they know, they realize that it's real and they're more inclined to want to make a change.
Issa, did you have your hand up a second ago?
I didn't, but I do actually kind of want to add on.
Go right ahead.
I just want to say, I was watching a TED Talk the other day, and this lady was basically saying that she's been on podcasts and radio shows and all that sort of thing to talk about her experiences with racism. And she was telling the story of a caller that called into the show she was on and said, I think I'm racist, but I want to change. Her telling her story and speaking up about a topic she was passionate about, she's managed to change this person's mind. She hopes she's done the same for so many other people. And so I think if you don't have to go to protest or really speak out, just telling your story online or to people you know can really make a difference. So whatever you can do.
Yeah, I don't want students waiting for the right words and how to, I just don't know how to communicate it. I'm just so frustrated. You can say it plain. I've told several people about the Heritage Act. Your little monument to John Calhoun does not matter more than my feelings, period. Period. Your history, your great-grand uncle or granddaddy does not matter more than the feelings of Black people in South Carolina who are hurting. And we got plenty other great people we can name stuff after. Those aren't the last couple of people we can name things. But you can feel free to say it plain. The important thing is saying it.
There's a lot of great things, and I want to point out 3 things before we move too far along. One, we can't dispute the power of sharing personal. That is so important, and it's really critical that you talk about these issues with people that are in your circle. And also, like Leon Lott said, build relationships. You have to have genuine relationships with people. People are politics. Leaders matter. People make a difference. And so you have to have these relationships to move the dialogue. And I also wanted to point out, this kind of relates to history, and this also kind of relates to Representative Clary just talking about the awareness. I don't know if you all know, but in 1967, there were a lot of race riots across the country, and particularly in Detroit. And President Lyndon Johnson actually commissioned a group of people to study what caused these riots, how do we, and what can we do moving forward. And I should have pointed this out when you talked about the history. I highly encourage all of you all to Google the Kerner Commission, Kerner Commission. And one of the things that really came out of this, that their basic conclusion was that our nation is moving towards 2 societies, Black, 1 white, separate and unequal. And so you have groups of people, we're living in South Carolina together, but we have very different realities. And so some of us are living and experiencing racism every day, and others don't see it at all. We can attribute some of that to history and redlining. There were laws where Black and white people could not live in the same community, and therefore our neighborhoods, our schools, our lives are segregated. And so the last thing that I want to mention, because I don't want to monopolize the time, but I want all of you all to think about, when was the first time that you really thought about race or racism? What was that earliest memory? More often than not, you're experiencing race when you're young, probably before kindergarten, because when you're young, you can see race. We're not colorblind. People talk about, we want to judge people by character, not the color of their skin, but we all have vision. And infants can actually see and distinguish different races. And so think about when you're a little child and you're in the store with maybe an adult and you wonder why somebody looks different. What does that adult tell you? Usually they'll say, shh, don't talk about this. And so we get these messages that we can't talk about race. Race is very emotional. And so we're learning, we're experiencing, we're seeing, we're observing, communicate about this. And so again, yes, I'm tired of the talk, but it's so important to build relationships, share stories, talk about experiences with those that are close to us, because it's harder to hate when you're up close. It's harder to say that didn't happen when you know that person and you actually have a genuine relationship with them.
Can I get Representative Clary? He had it up there for a minute. And thank you, Moria. That's exactly what we need here.
I think that it's really important, and I appreciate what Ileana had to say as well as theirs. In 2015, it was a horrendous act, and it was so personal to all of us. I am convinced that if we had not amended our sine die resolution to take up the removal of the Confederate flag, and if it had been left until 2016 when we came back into session, that it would have never happened. That time frame there would have been too much for us to overcome, I'm afraid. But we had to be able to move immediately and effectively, and we did that. And when we talk about the Heritage Act, I've been talking a lot about it over the last week or so. The constitutionality of that act has never been challenged. Everyone just accepts it as what it is. And I am a firm believer that before we try to do anything else, because nothing is going to happen with it until 2021, and that's the reason why the momentum is going to have to continue. But we need to have a court case which tests the Heritage Act and lets the state Supreme Court determine whether or not it is constitutional. And then if the court determines that it is the 2/3 requirement effective? So these are some things that we need to do, but you've got to be heard, but you've got to, when you are eligible, register to vote, run for office, get involved. Colleagues just tweeted the fact that, he is so frustrated now in the General Assembly because of the control that my party, and I'm an outlier in my party, that my party exerts upon the Democrats, that I get his frustration. I've talked to him about it. And what we have to do is we've got to build bridges and work together, but it's going to take all of you getting involved and building a base to raise that awareness and to raise that voice.
Yeah. I want to take, and thank you. I want to take this moment. We're at 12:10, and we want to open the floor up to a bit of Q&A. If you have, those of you who are watching and listening, wherever you are, if you could go ahead and place your questions in the chat. We're entering the chat. They'll begin pulling questions. Also, our Facebook Live folks, they'll begin to place some questions in there. Rashonda, I'm kind of putting you on the spot because I don't have my Facebook Live up, so I can't see those questions, but step in or gesture to me or whatever. Absolutely. For those questions that are coming. I want to do something a little odd, a little awkward to start off the cue to all of our young leaders on the panel. I want to thank you very much for being here. And I kind of want to start the Q&A out, giving you the floor for a moment. If any of the young leaders on, and I'm not calling anybody on the panel old when I say that, I said young leaders. So let me not say that. But to Nick and Ileana and Issa and Brantley, if any of you have specific questions for the professionals on the panel, we could start off that way, because all of you have made some very key points today. So if you have any specific questions that you may want to direct at the professionals on the panel as we're collecting questions from the chat.
Okay, I have a question that's just in general. I know we talked a little bit more about educating everyone on African American history and so many other cultures that need their history to be told. But how do you best say that young people should go about trying to reform the education system so that not only African American history can be taught in more detail, but the history of other minorities can be taught in more detail?
I'll jump in. First, I'll just speak from South Carolina. If you look at South Carolina's history curriculum, it's actually pretty solid. It's just a matter of how is that being implemented at the local level. Critical who's elected to your school board is so important, who your superintendent is. And I would say for young people, make sure you're going to the meetings. Make sure when you're going to these meetings, you're talking about the importance of history, or you're talking about the importance of the textbooks. Everybody has an opportunity to review the textbooks that are used. And, when you're in class, talk and build that relationship with your teacher, your history teacher. And, are there ways for you to supplement? Can you add, do additional programs? How can you be creative? It's been really fascinating for me to see how much TikTok has been used to inform young people about history. So as much as we say social media is bad, there's some really great things that are taking place in meeting students where they are. And so, not to say that the curriculum does not need to be improved. I think South has done a good job with the history curriculum and everything. So I don't necessarily think, young people need to spend their time advocating there as much. It's a matter of what's happening on the local level. I love that Representative Clary said it's so important for you to always vote. Even if you're not voting, talk to those people around you who can vote. Ask them who they're voting for, why they're voting. Make sure they vote in local elections. I don't want to get off on a tangent, but we just had elections and some races were decided by 3,000 people. So it's really important that you advocate, encourage, and tell people to vote, and that those people matter.
Go ahead, Issa.
Just a general question for anybody who has an answer. How much do you feel is it someone's personal responsibility to educate themselves about the history of race? Is it like the school system's responsibility to educate people properly?
I mean, I think for sure it's the school's responsibility to give a full picture and prepare these children for living in the world. And talking about racism helps you get that full picture and helps to educate these children to live in the real world that they have to live in. And it's also, I mean, it's everybody's personality to want to be the best self they can be, and you can't accomplish that without education. I would also say that I would ask our young people to consider the field of education. I know we think about being doctors and lawyers now. We don't think about being a teacher because that's not where the big money is. But what I can tell you is Black teachers matter. My children, I've got 3 children, all of them gone to a Black elementary school, not on purpose. It just happens to be where we're zoned, where the school is 80% Black. We had a show at the last PTA meeting that was Bane the Gong Show about Black history across ages. We talked about poets. We talked about performers. It's because the school's 80% Black. The teachers in the school are Black, not all. And then the teachers that are there have been there for a long time working with these children. I know Moya's seen the research where we talk about kids getting expelled from school, Black kids getting expelled at a higher rate from elementary school and preschool for the same offenses. But when our Black teachers are there, our Black teachers have a cultural connection to our children, and they give them grace to be kids in a way that our Black children don't always get the grace just to be kids. Everything is seen as a problem. Oh, he's dancing in the middle of class. Go to the principal's office. He's got ADD and jittery. Is he really going to get in trouble for dancing? Come on now. Give him a way to express that without getting suspended for every little thing. Not because he's Black, because he's disruptive. Because they won't say it's because he's Black, but they will call our kids disruptive. And when we have a classroom to bring in that cultural connection, they give our kids some grace that they don't get in the real world. My kids are now transitioning to a new school where they are not the majority, but they have a foundation now that I appreciate that their school provided.
Any of those questions? We got Brantley.
And Brantley, if your sound doesn't come through, go ahead and type it in chat.
Alrighty. Okay, can you hear me right now? Can y'all hear me? Somewhat, okay. I was just gonna ask you guys, do you guys think it's important to spread awareness on social media? Do you think it's necessary? Hello?
I see Elle raising her hand on that one.
Absolutely. I mean, because the reason why social media has become the force that it is because it's where people are. When you want to communicate with someone, you can't communicate with them if you are on planet A and they're on planet Z. So if you know that the people who need to hear your message are on Facebook or Instagram or whatever, it's where your message needs to be broadly displayed. You know who your target market is, then express that and where you need to express that at. So yes, social media is very important right now, especially during this pandemic.
Yeah. Representative Clary, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I think that it's really important for you to spread your message through any platform that's available. But I think it goes back to the very essence of the way that you do it. When I talk to PC, you want to be prepared with what you're discussing. You want to be respectful about it. And, what always infuriates me is when I look at something on social media and the picture will be of not that person, and it'll be a handle that is nothing associated with that person, and that tells me they're trying to hide behind something. Be proud of what you're advocating and push it out under your name, and make it personal when you address it to an elected official or someone like that. Is what's missing now. There's so much cut and paste, and it misses that personal touch that is necessary to get my attention with the number of emails and everything else that I get personal. I'm looking forward to reading it.
The other thing I would add, Brantley, is that you telling people where you stand is going to be so helpful to you. Last night I posted, there's an article about Boston getting rid of their facial recognition software because it was 30% unreliable in Black women. And San Francisco had done something similar. I got a lot of people in my circle that feel all kinds of things, and they are very emboldened based on what I see putting on Facebook, some of the things they say. But I feel like when I put out there where I stand, I'm putting these articles up there at 11 o'clock news. Are you, Brantley? On Channel 8, right? You're getting news from other sources. You're on the media getting news. So it helps to kind of inform your circles, but it also kind of sticks your trident in the stand of where you, and that I know people don't engage with me in foolishness because they know if they come at me that you better be ready. I have that smoke. I'm ready for it. But there's no, if Jamila will take this well. Oh, just know I won't take it well. So if you come to me with foolishness.
All right,
I
thank
want
you.
to, oh, sorry.
We do have a question in the group chat that I think is really good, and maybe some of our panelists can help, and also youth leaders can help us answer this question. It says, how can Caucasians support African Americans if they aren't going to the rallies?
Brantley, you go first. I defer to
Ed Brantley, I saw that hand.
Okay, it kind of piggybacks on the question I asked before, because personally, I feel like just posting a petition on social media, like on Instagram or Twitter, it just shows that you're aware of what's going on in society, and it shows that you somewhat care about what's going on with people. Usually it's affecting our lives as well, because personally, a lot of African Americans was ridiculous. We live in a country, the land of the free, whatever. But really, is it free? Is it free? If you have to live with different rules, kind of be scared to the police, whatever. So back to the topic. I'm sorry, but I feel like it's really important just to post on social media and just to have a conversation with people. That's the main thing we can really do if you're not really going to go to a protest.
And I'll say, just saying words, I have a vague circle of friends and associates. I can count on one hand in the last 2 months how many people have called me of my circle of white friends and said any words. Jamila, I don't understand what you're going through. I just feel so heavy for you. And I'm very outspoken about how I feel about these things. And I can count on one hand of my circle of probably 200-300 people who've called me personally or reached out in an email and said anything about what's going on recently. So just calling and reaching out. If you don't know the words, say, I don't know what to say, but I know it's hard for you right now. I can't imagine what it would be like being Black, but I'm so sorry.
Issa, Ileana, and then Representative Clary.
So I saw someone in the chat was kind of answering this a little bit, but and I know I've probably said this before. However, if the money donates support African American owned businesses, don't support anti-Black Lives Matter businesses. And just staying informed, honestly, I think that in an age of misinformation everywhere, that it's incredibly important to have as many facts as you can and be able to use any platform you have to make sure that everyone.
Ileana?
I agree with everything that everyone said thus far. I also think, going back to the communication thing, I think that communication is one of those double-sided things. And I know, speaking from personal experience, I'm in a group chat with a bunch of people in my grade, and we've known each other since middle school. And the group chat is predominantly white. And whenever, right after the George Floyd shoot about a lot of things in this chat, and one of the girls in my group chat had asked if anyone had anything to say, if anyone was going to talk about, and all this other stuff. And then I'm pretty sure a lot of the other African Americans in our chat, after that girl sent that message, got a lot of messages, other white people saying, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, I didn't know if it was appropriate to reach out, like all of these other things. So I think that sometimes people who aren't Black don't know how to confront African American people, or don't know how to ask questions, or don't know exactly what to ask or what to talk about. So I think if you, as an African American person, reach out to some of your white friends and ask, like, hey, how are you thinking? Do you think that what's happening right now is like okay, or like what are you doing to stop it? I think initiating that conversation as an African American person will help other non-people of color feel more comfortable about talking about a topic that may be uncomfortable for them.
I got a question, and then we will wrap it up. And it's a very good question. And this question's personal to me as well, because I identify as a Black male. And so this, I'm pretty sure is very important to several of the people listening right now. The question is, how can we, Black youth, utilize this situation to fuel them in their personal development and to ensure that this movement will empower them to go out in the world and be successful leaders despite all the negativity that they may be seeing or experiencing?
So on the opposite side, racists in America today, they have a very strong and unifying message, which is hate. And there's not a whole lot you can do to combat that unity. So I think that having an equally strong and unified presence on the other side is really important. That's all I have to say.
Okay. Anybody else?
Can I say something?
Yeah, Brantley. Yes, absolutely.
For one, we just need to remember that Black Lives Matter. Just remember that too, because this is not going to stop. This movement is just getting started. So we got to remember the mindset, and we just got to make sure our voices are being heard, especially for the upcoming generation. But we are the next generation, and I feel like this generation is going to do a really good job making that statement heard. So not letting that down. Know your history. Wait, did this come from an African American? Or I'll just say this: if you're an African American, just know your history. If you're not, make sure please educate yourself and just always be on the right side of history. That's all I can say.
I would just like to add that young people have always been on the front lines of change. I mean, even if you think about the founders of this country, they weren't teenagers, but they were still younger. But just going back to the civil rights movement, there were young people involved in the Birmingham Children's Crusade. There were young college students who were organizing sit-ins. And so I just want you all to stay positive. Again, you have so much information. You are able to connect with people all over the world. Learn how to organize. I said it's really important for you to complete the census that determines political representation. It's so important for you to understand the age at which you can run for office. A lot of times you can just be 18 to run for some local seats. And even if you can't run, please know that you can still be involved by going to meetings, encouraging other people to vote. You can also volunteer for different campaigns. And so there's a lot that you can do as a young person. And it's always critical for you to connect and communicate with others, and also educate yourself. Getting involved, dig deeper, go beyond the 100 sound bites. I really want you to understand, the history, understand that, and that's the way that we're going to move forward. The legal profession is always critical. If you look at major change in this country, a lot of it has been won in court cases. So I just encourage you to stay positive and do with what you have from where you are, and don't feel hopeless. There's always something you can do. You just being here today is great, and you can still do more.
So I think I saw Ilian, was your hand up just now? And then Representative Claire, did you have your hand up just a moment?
I was just going to say that make sure that you're confident in what you believe in. Like, if you know that you support the Black Lives Matter movement now, just because somebody at your school or just because somebody else in your life or in your community tries to tell you not to believe in what you believe, like, don't be so easily swayed by other people's opinions, because we are the voice of the future. We are the generation that hopefully will make a big change. Don't let other people's opinions about something deter you from what you believe. But that being said, don't be closed-minded to what other people have to say, because if a racist person is talking to you, trying to convince you to not believe in the Black Lives Matter movement or to not support that movement, it's very important that you listen to what they have to say in attempts to change their mind, to get them to believe and to be on the right side of history.
Representative Claire.
Ileana has what the essence of this is about. If you're going to make a change, you've got to be involved. And is it difficult? Absolutely. I think one of the most frustrating things of serving in public life now, it's not quite as bad in South Carolina as it is, but the hyper partisanship that we have now, the inability of people to even want to work across the aisle with other parties. When I came in here, I had a couple of careers, and politics wasn't something that I was planning on making a career out of and spending my life in. And I had a lot of relationships here in the General Assembly with Democrats, Republicans, and I learned very quickly I have to have 62 friends to go along with me to get anything done in the House. And so it's about building relationships. It's about being able to compromise, which is not a word that people like to hear now, but through compromise, some really good things are done. And sometimes it's at an incremental process, but please understand that. And there are a lot of really good role here in Columbia and elsewhere that you can talk to even model yourselves after, and also to expand that, because the new generation is going to have so many better ideas, the ones that my generation and the ones after me. I just think this is an exciting time to be part of the process in building change.
Did we have any other responses, quick responses from the remainder of our panelists? Nick, did you have anything there, sir? You're still on mute.
Sorry. Not too much, but I do agree with what everybody says, and I think that it's important to make sure that others are getting what you want them to receive. So if you're for the Black Lives Matter movement, then it's important to get that message out there and to share the right things and the right values that you believe in and that you want spreaded. And so it's just great to be peaceful about it. Just very, very important to also share what you believe in.
Good. Elle and Jamila, did you have anything quick to add as we wrap up? No? Okay.
I think I've talked enough today.
All good. It's all good. I want to thank all of the panelists who are here today. Thank you very much for your insight. Thank you very much for your wisdom and information, your knowledge. If there are anybody here on the panel that you want to continue discussion with our young leaders, if you could put your email or contact information over in the chat really quick, and so that kind of reach out to you and continue this dialogue, and that way to chat up for a little while so everybody can be able to get that contact information. With that being said, I do want to say one last thing, and that is that it's June, we're halfway through the year, and we are experiencing a global pandemic during one of the greatest civil rights movements in the history of the United States, along with a presidential election year. So the year is very long. And if there's anything that I've learned from playing video games, is that sometimes you get your favorite power up, but if you come to rely on just that one power up, it may not last you through the entire game. And so you find yourself disappointed because you can't beat the game, but you just try on that one power up. This does not need to be the last time we have this conversation. You want to continue this conversation. This conversation becomes a power up that you can take throughout the year. And so if you have the opportunity to have these conversations, continue. We have school starting back in August. We have the elections that will be taking place just a few months from now. There are a lot of things that are happening throughout this year in this state. Continue the dialogue, continue the conversation. As a matter of fact, in July 14th, 15th, and 16th, we're having the second roundup, a series of talks and conversations are happening right here. And Ms. Rashonda Olden will be getting in touch with you with how to get to that. You'll be able to connect through Facebook Live as well as Zoom. So continue to look out for those, because we'll continue this conversation moving forward.